Hi, I'm Bob Ethington.
And I'm Nick Nicholas.
And this is From Akron and Beyond. Special guest is one Mr. Harvey Gold. We talk, of course, about the local Akron music scene in its historic ramifications and also what's going on today. And we'll eventually get around to talking about, movie makers and writers and all kinds of people creatively from Akron who are doing great work. But today we're going to be talking with Harvey Gold, and he has a lot of stories. So I have a feeling that we will maybe even get two parts out of this one.
I hope.
Yeah, I think that's very possible. Harvey is, dare I say, something of a fixture in the Akron music scene, and beyond, because his work has taken him all over the country and a lot of adventures in New York City, and we'll get to that as well. But anyway, without further ado, as they say, hello, Harvey. How are you?
I have nothing to say.
Well, that's the end of the show. That was really great.
Come on.
Hi, guys.
So, of course, Harvey is known for his work in the seminal Akron band Tin Huey, and then moving forth from there, all kinds of different work. Today he's in the hi-fis. He has a project called Golems of the Red Planet. He made a terrific solo album that came out a year or so ago, and we'll get to all of that stuff. But I want to begin really with the most basic question that I can think of, but I really don't know the answer, Harvey, which is, how did you actually get interested in music in the first place? Did you take piano lessons as a kid? What's the story?
When I was 7, I started taking piano lessons. I had a lady who lived next door to us on Madison Avenue in West Akron named Mrs. Merrill, who had a little dog named Skippy and an upright piano. And I would go over to her house and play two fingers on her piano. I had a little pattern that my brother liked to call El Cid, and I would play that. It's like Spartacus from that thing you do. And I started taking piano lessons. My parents got a piano. They like to say it was for me. I had a cousin from California who was a fine classical pianist who ran away from her family and came and lived with us for a while, and they got her a piano. And then when she left, it was like, oh, look, we got you a piano. Practice.
Was that when were you just playing like whatever basic kind of piano lesson music would be, like classical pieces and things?
It was pretty much standard issue 101 piano, but my piano teacher, Blanche Stewart, also was like crazy and brought me this book and introduced me to, I believe the book is called The Hollow Earth, and it's where all the UFOs come from. They come from inside the Earth and come up through a place in the North Pole that's so remote nobody pays attention to it, and that's where the UFOs come from. And that was my beginning as a musician.
Was the guitar a lot later?
On my 12th birthday, my big brother Larry, who's 11 years older than me, came up to me and said, Dad's going to be really pissed. And he handed me a used Harmony Archtop acoustic that he paid $5 for, and he was right. Dad was really pissed.
Well, was that before the Beatles and Ed Sullivan, or
no? I turned 12 in October of I guess 1963, when the Beatles were on in February of '63, right?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. So it was after the Beatles had started up, and I was pretty jazzed.
I mean, that had to have been a heck of an influence on you, right?
Yeah, I mean, I promised my dad I would. You mean the Beatles?
Yeah. No, not your dad.
I generally tend to say that the Beatles changed everything.
Yeah.
They changed absolutely everything. It wasn't. It was a musical thing that happened, but it was a musical thing that changed everything.
Changed the world.
It taught me to say the words no to my parents. It really did. It emboldened me beyond belief, and that's what it did to a whole generation.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah. So now, what was the first band that you had? I mean, no matter how youthful and juvenile it may have been, I'm curious what the first actual ensemble you played with was?
I think the first thing was just this garage band that was on borrowed instruments. You know, the bass player for Tin Huey was Mark Price.
Yes.
And his older brother Steve had always played in bands. So there was always gear around. And I believe we were playing in my garage on Crestview a few songs. We never gigged anywhere.
Were these just high school or junior high school?
It was junior high.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, I did have a band that was really creatively called The Show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually got to see you. Remember?
Yeah, we were actually pretty good. It was before I had heard White Light, White Heat, that album, which also chemically changed me to this day.
The Velvet Underground.
There are problems with that.
But you know what? When I saw you guys at the coffee house,
The Avalon.
The Avalon. Yeah. Well, I don't know what it was called. It was it was in between the two Avalons. It was at a church.
Oh, right.
In West Akron. That Craig Yo, somebody else that we'll discuss further. You know, in another episode. Yeah,
you should.
But I saw you guys, and we actually there's an underground newspaper that came out around that time called the Akron Acorn, and we had a story on you.
What year? Now, what year are we talking about?
That was when that was 70.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was 2 girls, 3 guys. One guy played bass, 2 guys, 3 of us maybe played acoustic guitars, and we were doing a lot of vocal stuff. Obviously, a lot of Beatles and Buffalo Springfield, Crosby, Stills and Nash. You know, a little Tim Buckley to show some sort of integrity.
You know, that was like for me to remember something like this, you did an intense version of Ohio.
Yeah,
that
we
was
did.
just on the radio then. Because Kent, it was really a couple months after Kent State, and everything was new and fresh and painful.
Yeah,
and you just knocked the audience out with that.
Oh, well, thank you. So that's what I did for a while, and then everybody graduated high school and went their separate ways, and then. But prior to that, things started getting weird because the first Velvet Underground came out, and I liked it. And then the second one came out, and I remember laying down on a friend's bed with a pair of Koss headphones on, listening to the 2 notable things were Lou Reed's guitar solo on I Heard Her Call My Name and all of Sister Ray. And by the time it was done, I took the headphones off, said, "Oh, that's interesting." And he said, "What do you want to listen to now?" And I said, "How about Buffalo Springfield Last Time Around," which was an album that I was really digging at the time. And we laid the needle down, and it started into the first track, and I went screaming out of the room. I can't really explain it further than that, except that my musical taste took a hard left
Got warped
at that moment, and it actually never really went back right, And there were no drugs involved, which is, for that period of time, shocking.
That's actually around the time when a couple months after that, when I actually got to meet you in a different way, when my buddy, who was another member of the Bizarros who passed away a few years ago, Terry Walker, he was a guitar major, and so were you. Mm-hmm. So was Paul Hively. And my friends, and
we all gave guitar lessons for the Kalal brothers.
Yeah,
because they didn't know how to play anything that was folk or rock, and they didn't even know what a flat pick was. And
Terry said, "Hey, there's a guy in my class, and he knows about the Velvet Underground too." And so he introduced me to you at the Hilltop, and the rest is history.
It is.
It's the famous anecdote or story from Brian Eno about how I forget the exact number, but he says something like only 2,000 people bought the first Velvet Underground album, but they all started a band.
Everyone started a band.
And it's very strange and interesting to me how true that seems to be, because so many of the people that I have done music with all were really affected by that band. And, the Velvet Underground albums, like I'm a few years younger than you guys, those albums weren't even available for years. Like Dean Wareham of Luna, I heard an interview with him once, and he said that when he got into the Velvet Underground album, it was that 1969 live album, remember? With the horrible cover.
Yeah, it was terrible.
Oh, the green cover with a girl's leg?
Terrible,
yeah.
absolutely hideous cover.
Her butt.
But he said that was the
butt.
only, he said that was the only Velvet Underground album you could buy. They were all the Verve stuff was out of print for years. So it's just amazing to me, that kind of little window where those guys were being heard.
Let me just say that what it did to me was significant enough that they should have gathered all the Velvet Underground albums and buried them in a hole in the desert, because I was poisoned. It was hot as shit.
All of us were.
Sorry.
Yeah. Hey, did you know that at a minimum, the first Velvet Underground album on eBay with an unpeeled banana is like $1,000?
Yeah. If it's in good, perfect shape, right? Yeah.
But just unpeeled.
Right.
Because everybody, first thing they did was, I still have mine unpeeled.
Well, keep it that way.
You're walking on down the street. Look at all your friends. It's gonna meet. She's gonna ball shot. She's gonna work it. She's gonna work it out. Bye bye. Bye 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 bye.
So, now wait a minute. So you ended up like a guitar major then?
Yeah.
Okay. So you were academically pursuing that.
Yeah.
Okay.
He thought he was. His dad thought he was.
My dad thought Nick knows too much about me. Yeah, actually, I was paying for it myself, giving guitar lessons with Terry and Hively.
Really?
Yeah. And then I got distracted and continued on with my higher education as what ended up being a member of Rags, and then that turned into Tin Huey.
So, okay, that's a nice segue there, because I was going to ask you
I'm here to
about
help you
this.
guys out.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, this is From Akron and Beyond, our radio show and podcast that deals with the local music scene of Akron, amongst other things from Akron. And this is where things get interesting to me, because, of course,
They better get interesting.
It's been very interesting so far, Harvey. But it gets interesting for me because I was, of course, a late blooming member of Tin Huey many years later. But I'd like to hear about, you say the original name was Rags, and tell me, how old are you guys when you start playing? Are you like 16, 17?
You're asking me to remember certain things that, because of the time, are just not physically possible. I was probably 19 years old, maybe.
Okay.
18, I don't know. Rags was a band that was formed by actually the original Tin Huey drummer, Stuart Austin, and Michael Elward on
guitar.
In that case, but in Rags he played bass.
Oh, okay.
And Mark Price, who was the bass player for Tin Huey, actually was the guitar player.
Okay.
And he played intensely weird, crazy, shredding guitar. And they would do this really kind of an interesting take on music, which was like 20-minute versions of Substitute and 25-minute versions of McCartney's That Would Be Something. I mean, it was like messed up. And they actually did a rather historic gig where they played for about an hour and a half, and I think they only did 2 songs at the Avalon Coffee House. And I remember at the end of it, Stuart Austin and I discussed how the only way he should be drumming would be with an IV. So anyway, ultimately somebody dug up a portable organ of some nature, I think that was part of Mark's Big Brothers band, who did an album on United Artists called Wild Butter. So there was an organ to play, so I joined up with them playing organ. And then, how can I say this diplomatically? Then Mark tried to shoot his cat, and they put him in Fallsview, and Rags kind of fell apart because of this.
Is that a true story?
Yes. And I make this stuff up. Come on.
Well, I heard that Mark had some issues, but I didn't know that. Anyway.
Yeah, he thought Squawker should be moved to a higher plane of existence. That was his logic.
He was going to enable the cat to do that.
So anyway, Michael and Stuart and I sort of went over to somebody else's basement for a while. And we were like an acoustic band doing like, early T-Rex stuff. And I mean, we never gigged out. And then it just sort of developed. There were a couple people named Arthur Baranoff, who's a great friend of mine, played guitar with us. A fellow named Wayne Swickley, who I knew at the university, played bass with us. And ultimately, those guys left. Arthur likes to say he quit before we could fire him. And Wayne just simply doesn't speak to me anymore. You talk about having conversations 40 years after the fact. It's like, hey, Wayne, I don't want to speak to you. And that was when we got Mark, who apparently had stabilized.
Yeah. Enough, just barely enough.
Barely enough, and only for about 5 minutes. We got him to join us as a bass player. And that's when Tin Huey started taking shape as an electric band.
Okay, so 2 quick questions here. First of all, where did the name Tin Huey come from?
Yeah, I always wondered.
When Michael and Stuart and I were down in the basement, one New Year's Eve, we were down there, and I don't know how to explain this. People did what they were doing in celebratory moments at that time.
Okay.
And so we were in a...
Fill in that blank, I think.
We'll say the room was a little hazy.
Okay.
And we were playing, and Michael's brother Huey came walking down the stairs with something I think he had gotten as a Christmas gift, which was a leather motorcycle jacket with a whole bunch of studs and stuff all over it. And I started doing this buffoonish, stupid song called Huey's Made of Tin.
Oh.
And we just sort of played it for a while and said, what the hell, let's call ourselves Tin Huey. And everybody was like, that'd be good. Yeah, let's do that here.
That makes sense.
You know.
Okay, so now at this point, am I correct that this is when you guys start writing original songs?
Yeah.
Do you remember the first song that you wrote for Tin Huey?
No.
Okay. I know that's an unfair question, but I thought I'd try.
Like called Kill All Green Dogs and Korean Sunset.
You bought a car, a Korean car.
I just bought one. Yeah. Thank you. That was a legacy thing. And we did stuff that you would expect us to be doing. We were doing covers by Amandul.
Yeah.
We were doing stuff by Faust. We were then doing stuff by the Stooges. You know, I mean, that was sort of the whole thing about Tin Huey, ultimately, was that it was very hard to peg us because we lived the world of you are what you eat. And we ate a lot of different things, especially, and you guys would know this, from working in record stores, you got to hear everything. It's like working at a radio station. But we were pretty twisted for the most part.
Because you worked at Disc Records at Summit Mall.
Yes, I did.
think that's where I first met you, actually, many years ago.
Well, we're talking a time period here when I used to see Tin Huey before you guys had any records out, but you were doing some gigging, with Pere Ubu and other bands. That was like probably 75, 76. So now that Bob, you're talking about this time period, how many years before you were like playing like the Agora and was this? What time period are we talking about?
Once again, you boys want to talk dates and actual information.
Yeah.
Well, look, we didn't play the Agora until after we had signed with Warner Brothers. Nobody gave
you did. Well,
no.
Yep.
I don't think so.
Yep.
Okay, fine.
You did with Pere Ubu.
Let me interview. Hey, Nick, do you remember when Tin Huey played with Pere Ubu at the Agora?
Yes.
I mean, we did do some stuff. I mean, we opened for... we had a couple really good gigs where we opened for Caravan and what's his name from Vandergraaf Generator, Peter
Hamill.
Yeah. Pete Hamill. And we opened for New York Gong when they came through, which was very cool. But I don't remember the dates, actually. We didn't really gig much at all. We were really a weirdo band, Nick. I mean, we were doing these 20-minute blocks of Sister Ray, or a 20-minute block where we would play Faust's Sunshine Girl, It's a Rainy Day, and then segue skillfully into We Did It Again by Soft Machine for another 15 minutes. We drove people out. But the thing about us was that while I didn't realize that we were considered a prog band until Robert Christgau of the Village Voice said, I don't normally like this kind of stuff. But what was interesting about us is, as you know, we might have been doing kind of complex proggy kind of stuff at times, but we were always playing it at 140 decibels at like rocket speed. And so it was like I guess in retrospect, it would be considered like a really punk take on prog.
And speaking of prog, I know that a major influence on you guys, especially I believe you and Michael and Stu, was the Canterbury bands. So you mentioned Caravan, and that would be Soft Machine, Robert Wyatt solo stuff, Keith, Kevin Ayers solo stuff.
Ayers.
Yeah.
The genesis for all of us was absolutely Soft Machine.
Really?
Absolutely. Michael and Stewart had the good fortune of seeing Soft Machine because they came through Cleveland a few times. You know, they came opening for Jimi Hendrix, but they also, I think, played the Grandee or they played Le Cave. They played more than a couple gigs around here. I never got to see them. It's a heartbreak for me.
Yeah.
But I did get to see Kevin Ayers and the whole world at Hurrah in New York.
Did you?
Wow.
Yeah, I went to it with David Allen from Gong.
We saw
cool.
Caravan, remember? We saw them at Smiling Dog.
Yeah, and we opened for Caravan somewhere.
Okay.
I don't know where.
All right. So I'm Bob Ethington. We're here with Nick Nicholas, and our special guest is Harvey Gold. This is From Akron and Beyond. And we're talking with Harvey about his career in music, and
About
we have,
old rusty prog.
yes, and old, and
That's what you two go to the summit for.
and trying to figure out dates
Sorry.
that no one seems to be able to remember. But what I want to get now, let's get down to Tin Huey and your first recordings and how you got a record deal with Warner Brothers.
Well, our first recordings were all about Nick.
Okay,
Nick.
Clone Records.
My God, Nick started Clone Records, and it was a spectacular opportunity. I mean,
You guys had the studio.
well, Mark Price built a studio at his house, but you know, the thing was Nick started an indie label before there were indie labels, really.
Yeah.
You know, it's I don't know that you think of yourself as a pioneer. Oh no, Nick's taking that I'm a humble man, hand over his mouth sort of position now.
But he wants you to keep talking.
But,
about
you know, the good news, it's interesting enough
accomplishments.
now that Brad's not looking at his phone anymore, so here we go. Yeah, I mean, look, you can always record on a machine, you know, great. Oh, let's turn on the old TAC down here and let it run. But the point is that Nick gave us an opportunity to actually have vinyl. And so we started with a 4-song EP that was just called Tin Huey.
What songs were on that?
You're asking me questions.
That's
again.
a hard one.
There was a song. There was a live track from JB's, an instrumental called Poor Alfonso that was on there.
Puppet Wipes.
And then Cuyahoga Creeping Bent. Yes, Cuyahoga Creeping Bent. We recorded all. Actually, we didn't record those at Mark's. We recorded that at a studio called Krieger Field that was over on High Street.
Oh, I remember that place.
Yeah, and John Mondel worked there. And I mean, this is hello everyone. Nick and I are just gonna, we're gonna order up a piece of pie and ask about each other's wives. But so those were 3 of the songs. I can't remember all of
Puppet
them.
Wipes.
Okay,
Yeah.
Oh,
That's the third one.
there were 4 songs.
Okay.
If this was a proper radio station, they'd have a copy of it right now and be able to tell me what
But
it was.
Puppet Wipes is on your album, isn't it?
Puppet Wipes was redone for the Warner Brothers album, yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, we did that, and then we followed it up with a single that was called Breakfast with the Hueys, and that was Squirm You Worm and something else.
I should have that with me.
Yeah, you're doing great. My label over here. However, it was cool because Nick was just not making records and handing them to the local record store. He was being, what I guess you would consider global in a real fashion because we would get little reviews. They would show up in the Village Voice. Chris Gow really liked our stuff, which is kind of where it all started.
College radio stations, fanzines.
Absolutely, and I think we may have gotten like somebody did a blurb about one of those independent releases on like Trouser Press. I think maybe Ira wrote something. Maybe I'm not sure.
Ira Robbins. Yeah.
I could call Ira and ask him.
Well, there were a lot.
All right, we're old now. We can talk to you. So that was really the beginning of it. And it's an interesting thing because it's like, well, what did releasing something on Clone Records lead to in a substantial way in the real world? Also, what did releasing stuff on Clone Records and seeing your stuff out there do to your spirit? Mm-hmm. Because a lot of things weren't going on for us. I mean, we still weren't gigging. I mean, eventually we got a gig at JB's playing 3 nights a week upstairs while the Numbers Band were downstairs. And the only reason the guy hired us, and this is wonderful, this is after Ralph Carney joined the band, but the only reason he hired us was because he was like a Grover Washington Jr. fan, and we had a saxophone in our band.
Oh, no.
He had no idea what kind of absolute detritus we were about to throw into his club.
That's cool.
So there was a point before changes occurred after that where we brought Chris Butler into the band and moved on and ended up on Warner Brothers. But we were thinking, we really were thinking about just packing up and moving to Europe. Because, a lot of our favorite bands were actually kind of surviving there.
Right.
Whether it was Soft Machine or Caravan or Kevin Ayers was playing. I mean, I'd go live on Majorca with those guys.
You'd make that sacrifice?
Yeah, I could fake it. I mean, we're talking about taking our families and going. Not that, if it came right down to it, we made the move, everybody would actually say, let's go. But as a band, we were pretty unified in the idea that we needed to do something. And so we did, but it wasn't that. But it gave us courage being on Clone and having records coming out.
Well, it's interesting, really, because
Thank you, Nick.
Because I think that we were talking on our first show about how the music industry has changed and how today, with streaming and what have you, there's, almost anybody can put music out and theoretically can be heard by anyone in the world. That's great. The
Which
problem
still
is,
benefits us now.
But the downside of that is there's so much that it's hard to even curate it. It's hard to even find the music because if there's everything, then how do you choose anything?
It's
right?
a different world to navigate in.
And so when we were doing music and back in those days, when you had, even if it was Clone Records, right? Even if it was an indie label out of Akron, at least you knew that there was like a solid product there and it was being sent out. The distribution is the point. It was being distributed to people who might actually play it and then they might actually like it, right? And then you might actually get a response to it. And
exactly.
I think that's a thing that young bands now, a lot of young bands, and obviously there's a lot who are doing great. But a lot of young bands, I think it's kind of them butting their heads against like, man, we're putting all this music out. We don't even get a response to it.
There's a guy out there that, Brad might actually know of him. I can't remember his last name. His first name is Airy. It's like Hirschsteiter or something. And he's making a living doing this, but it has to do with, he does seminars, he does books, they wrote me and they wanted me to come to New York for this seminar, except I had to pay $900 to do it. I almost went because I was curious, but, it's all about getting your music placed. It has a lot less to do with selling records. There are no records. And, I get the statement from our publishing company, as to how many 1/100ths of a cent every play of Lazy Boy makes or Hump Day, as Tin Huey music. But the whole idea was, how do you get it placed with either get other artists to cover it or people who are doing movies or television or commercials can be exposed to it. And that is almost impossible. I tried to find out online, are there any listings as to what things are going into production and who's the music director and so that you can maybe be a little surgical about it.
Right.
You don't want to send, a tune about UFOs to a guy who's working on a Western. But the fact is that that's even difficult. That's where the market is, and it's almost impossible to navigate that unless you pay Ari a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
Because then you go to these things and you start meeting those people. And then I think but the problem is that when I became a musician, I did not, for instance, I didn't want to become a recording engineer. I wanted to become a musician.
Right.
And, now that I'm doing music again, I do not want to be a music manager. And so I just play and post it.
Well, how many bands and artists are like just so inspired and just hanging on to that hope that, like Kate Bush and Stranger Things, their career is going to suddenly get reborn because it ends up on a popular TV show.
The last group, the Cramps, just had a resurgence from a TV show.
Yeah, exactly. I
have a friend who, by the way, this is a really weird story. His father was an Akron cop, and his name was Jack Porter, and he was in a band back in the day, and he was like, I don't know what he did. He did Vice or he did drugs, narcotics or something, but he had a band that was like Sergeant Jack and the Night Shift or something. Yeah? Anyway, not a long story, but the short story is that his son Jack, I just became friends with him, and he goes under the name of Jack Atlantis, and he's in a Cramps tribute band. No. And he's great. And they're doing. He just went out to L.A. and did a gig, and they've got a European tour booked.
He's based in Akron still. He lives.
No, he's going to be moving back, but he's in the Southwest right now. That was just
interesting.
And so this is a perfect time for him, isn't it?
So let us discuss now, finally, how Tin Huey got signed to Warner Brothers.
It's an interesting thing. Nick could probably even tell you about it with greater accuracy.
I was there that night.
You were. Because of Nick's and Chris Butler's reaching out, there was a relationship that had already been established with Robert Christgau at the Village Voice. And he decided to do, and correct me if I'm wrong about any of this because I usually am, he had decided to do a series for the Voice called Down in the Boonies. And he had assigned one guy to go to Minnesota because of Husker Du. He assigned another guy, or girl, I'm sorry, to go to Austin because of Dwight Twilley. That's kind of what we attached to those at the time. And he chose to come to Akron.
And he stayed with me for a couple weeks when fell in love with Akron.
Yeah, and we did we put together a pretty aggressively put together a big show at JB's. There were a lot of people there.
And I'd like to point out that a lot of listeners to this probably know who Robert Christgau is, but if you don't know who he is one of the premier rock critics in the United States.
The dean of rock.
He named himself the dean of rock journalism.
Yeah. There's like him and Grail Marcus and the late Lester Bangs. These are kind of like the names that like really kind of made rock criticism sort of an art form in a way, and he continues to do it to this day. So I just wanted to point out that
it's a good point.
This was a guy who if he liked you, that had a lot of cachet. Right?
It would mean a lot to you in your heart, regardless of how many records it didn't sell. However, that's another conversation I had with him over dinner one night. He came in and we did a gig. It was the Bizarros and Tin Huey. And interestingly, this got put together the way it did because Nick was like, so you guys are playing JB's 3 nights a week in front of 7 people, but you've got a gig there, so how about if we do it there? I remember that. So we did. And I don't know whether he said it there or whether he called later, but he had said that he was going to do something that he had never done before, which was he called his friend Karen Berg, who was A&R at Warner Brothers.
She just signed television, and
she had signed television to Elektra and Idol's Dire Straits.
Dire Straits, yeah.
And anyway, he had told her that she should hear us. She was voted, A&R Person of the Year in Rolling Stone for like 3 or 4 years in a row. Anyway, so then we get this call, and we start freaking out because 2 weeks later, Karen comes in, and we pick her up at the airport and bring her in, and we do our first set. And during the break, she takes Chris and me aside and says, "Do you have a lawyer?" And it was met by a moment of silence. And we said, "Well, no." And she said, "Well, I don't normally do this, but I have a really good friend, David Sonnenberg, who is Meatloaf's manager and Patti Smith's lawyer. And, it's weird for me to be part of the label telling you what lawyer to get, but this would be good for you because I'm going to be offering you guys a contract with Warner Brothers." We then proceeded to play a really messy set.
Well,
we were so jacked up.
you don't forget, though, that was like a pretty important night as far as music royalty. I mean, at the table that I sat at with Karen Berg, there was Jerry Wexler.
No, that was 2 weeks later.
What?
2 weeks later.
Also, the big thing later was
she came back. She came back with Jerry Wexler and with Michael Austin.
Yeah,
you sat with Michael, who was Mo Austin, the founder of Warner Brothers' son,
and the guy that was and Wexler's son that was going to produce.
Paul was there too.
Yeah.
I hope Paul's not listening to this.
So I didn't know about the first thing.
Yeah.
Oh,
that was when you played with us on the first thing. The second time when you were sitting at the table, I think we were playing with Chai Pig or somebody else.
Yeah. Now, God, talk about
Teacher's Pet, maybe.
Talk about fuzzy memories.
Thank God I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
So anyway, so it just snowballed. But our second set was real crap, and I thought, oh no, what have we done? Because everybody's like playing at 12,000 miles an hour.
Right.
We're completely jazzed.
Adrenaline had kicked in.
Hey guys, we're going to Warner Brothers. I forgot the G chord.
But that had to be very exciting.
It was exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's, and then she came back with Jerry Wexler, who was the the godfather of R&B.
Mr. Atlantic.
Oh my God, Mr. Atlantic, Mr. Muscle Shoals.
Yeah, right.
Mr. Aretha. Help me out here. Yeah. And that was great. I remember a little later we went to New York. I don't know what we were doing, but it was Chris and I flew to New York. I think it was to give a retainer to Sonnenberg and Jerry. Warner Brothers thought that we were being feted by other labels, which we were not. But he called us and he said, "So what are you boys doing? You want to let me take you to lunch?" And he took us to lunch in the Milton Berle Room at the Friars Club. And Butler and I are just like completely agog. It's like, is that salmon? I don't care. And, that was when one of us said, Jerry, somebody should write a book about you. And he opens his briefcase and pulls out a book, which has a chapter on Jerry Wexler. It was pretty exciting stuff.
I remember talking to him about Clone Records, and at the time there was like he was talking about the Muscle Shoals thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes I have a problem with inventory. Like I had too many of something, He's basically said, "Couldn't you just press a lot less?" So
that was his business advice to you.
Yeah. Jerry was what Jerry liked about us was that we were actually in tune. I mean, he didn't say, "I love this crazy ass stuff you're doing, Karen." He just said, "Well, their guitars are in tune." And that was the night that, we tried actually really hard, Chris and I did, to get him after our show to go downstairs and see the Numbers Band, because Jerry was a blues guy. We may have talked about it at the time that we were on the show together with Bob Kidney, because
we did.
they thought that we were like interlopers, and you guys were the ones, you and Chris were the ones who arranged this thing to happen. But we were saying, Jerry, you got to see these guys, because if anybody asks me today what my favorite band is, it's the Numbers Band.
Me too.
Which is, I know they're a local band, but when they are cooking, they are the best band I know of. But
They sing about the truth, man.
whoa, that was deep.
Really, I mean, that's
There is
needs to be known and remembered for is the Numbers Band.
To quote RuPaul, there is a realness to it. Anyway, but Jerry was just hungry, and he wouldn't go downstairs.
Wow.
Oh, it was sad. It was sad. But anyway, that's kind of how we got signed to Warner Brothers.
So Tin Huey, then in its official original incarnation, is Stuart Austin on drums, Mark Price on bass.
The original incarnation was Stuart Austin, Harvey Gold, and Michael Elwood.
Right.
The electric, yes,
Yes.
may continue.
Okay, so the band that ultimately gets signed to Warner Brothers.
Yes.
Then is Michael Elwood on guitar, you on guitar and keyboards, and then
Mark on bass.
Ralph Carney, Mark Price on bass, said that, and then Ralph Carney on saxophone, and Chris Butler, of course, on guitar. I'd like, if you would, because we'll be having separate shows on both Ralph and Chris down the road, but if you would just talk for a minute about how they got added, because as you kind of touched on, the original nucleus of the band was kind of you four guys, and then you kind of, Ralph and Chris both came later. Did Chris come after Ralph?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We decided to, somebody, I can't remember who suggested it. It might have been my friend Jim Kaufman, who ended up being Tin Huey's road manager and was kind of a musical guru to us at one point or another. It's like, no, that's crap. Oh, that's really good. That kind of guru. But we got Ralph to play with us like right out of high school. But that was a period of time when we were doing like stuff by Gong. And,
Right.
And we had a saxophone player prior to him, Lockie McIntosh. We'll end up talking about that at some point. But Lockie left, and we brought Ralph in, and so that was a huge change. It's an interesting thing when you're dealing with brilliance. And there was a lot of brilliance in Tin Huey. I mean, Michael Elwood could play a guitar solo that would just stop things. Mark Price once did a bass riff that was so weird, the entire band in the middle of a song just stopped. And I walked over and punched him. And then we started again. We picked up the song. But neither one of those guys could remember to go to the G chord most of the time, but we didn't care because they were doing stuff that would make you go blind. But bringing Ralph in, who was, my goodness, I don't even know he was a force of nature in a really, really geeky, weird, interesting, smart way. It just, we that's where we moved more towards our weirder stuff, a little more towards a jazzy universe. Still at 140 decibels and playing really fast.
Right.
So that was wonderful, having Ralph. And then Chris, well, when we would play at JB's upstairs and the Numbers Band were downstairs, Chris was the bass player for for the Numbers Band. And something started happening, which would be we'd be in the middle of our set and we'd be between songs, and from the dark, because JB's was pretty dark, I would hear a voice yelling, Harvey Gold, call your mother. And it was Butler heckling me. Now, at the same time, Chris was just starting his what later became an important project. He was starting the universe of a band that was a fictional band at the time, that he, because he and Liam Sternberg were coming up with fictional stuff to put on compilation records, called The Waitresses. And he did a single on on Clone Records of the A-side. I don't know what the A-side was. It was The Comb, which actually Tin Huey debuted with Patty Donahue in Kent and then in New York later. And the flip side was a song called Clones, which was very Devo-ish and weird and strange. And that, along with somebody saying, hey, maybe you should get Butler in the band, we were like, yeah.
Well, sure. That single also had a song that wound up becoming renamed as I Know What Boys.
I Know What Boys
I Know
Like.
What Boys Like?
Yeah.
No. See, this is your memory now. It was The Comb, and it was, go ahead, look it up. It was The Comb, and because, well, there's a whole story
No,
there.
it was called Wait Here, I'll Be Right Back.
Which ended up being I Know What.
Yeah, it was on that single.
Okay.
Anyway.
You're the label. Anyway, so that we asked Chris to join, and that's when things went into hyperspeed. There was a chemistry between Chris and me that was nuts. I mean, we went through gallons of coffee and just wrote and planned and came up with little tricky things to do, whether it was graphically or publicity-wise or musically, and completely retooled Tin Huey. First of all, to make room on a lot of the songs that we had for him, and then bringing his material in and really put together a comedian would call a tight five.
Was Hump Day one of his songs?
Yes.
Because I remember every Wednesday WMMS would play that.
Yep.
That was their...
That was it. So, and that was when the whole, really the wave came in. And it was working with Chris. We were practicing 4 or 5 nights a week. We were gigging 3 nights a week. Who knows how we were doing it. We were always together. And then we did that gig with the Bizarros at JB's. And, we ended up going to Warner Brothers. Those guys ended up going to Mercury, and off we went.
Yeah. I'm Bob Ethington. I'm here with Nick Nicholas. This is From Akron and Beyond, and our guest is Harvey Gold of many different musical projects, but particularly of note, Tin Huey, the very important Akron band from the late 70s, early 80s. We were talking about when Tin Huey's album was, when they were signed to Warner Brothers and when their album came out. And speaking of that album, were there any singles off that album?
I'm a Believer.
I'm a Believer, which was a cover of the Neil Diamond song and sort of the Robert Wyatt arrangement.
Well, what happened was we walked into practice one day, and if you listen to the Robert Wyatt version of, which we thought was just hysterical. First of all, the idea that Tin Huey, this Wally band, is covering a Robert Wyatt cover of a Monkees tune by Neil Diamond seemed to me to be really funny. Nobody else, we laughed at it. Nobody else got it. Warner Brothers, when we were talking about doing a second album with them, were like, can you do more of those? It's like, I don't know.
Was that Michael singing on that?
Yes, Michael sang lead. And I just walked in one day and started playing the opening piano riff that Robert Wyatt did on his version, which is very different than anything the Monkees did.
Right.
And Michael just rammed in this like massive, massive power chord over it. Right. And I was like, ooh, we could do a power pop version of this. So that was the single. I'm not sure what the flip B-side was.
Yeah.
The interesting thing also is that when we knew that we were signing with Warner Brothers, before we had resolved who our producer was going to be and how we were going to go about doing the album, was when Karen Berg booked us to play 3 nights at the Bottom Line with opening for television. And that was their last 6 gigs. And that was our first 6 in New York. And that was one of the most monumental nights, 3 nights of my life.
Sure.
I mean, all these people came to the gigs. Robert Fripp was there, Eno was there, all these people were showing up. None of it mattered. What mattered was we got to see television 6 times.
Amazing.
And they were just and that's an interesting thing about record production because, Marquee Moon is a great album, but it's got a very brittle production to it. And we walk in and they start playing and they are this big-ass guitar band that just crushes you. So all that stuff that was suggested on the album is real. And it was amazing. It was an amazing 6 nights, or 3 nights.
Now, did Tin Huey ever actually tour, per se?
We had well, kind of, sort of, yes. But it was club touring. And it was not very well put together. We ended up with a really high-powered lawyer and we had no real management. And that was a problem. Interestingly, there was this whole other intrigue because we have to go visit him, by the way. We had a friend, Ed Strait, who came from Warner Electro Atlantic and moved over to EG Management, which managed Roxy Music and Fripp, and and actually, when Tin Huey was practicing in the basement in West Akron once, Brian Ferry, Paul Thompson, and whatever the guy's name was at EG came down, and along with Debbie Smith and Sue Schmidt of Chai Pig, we performed Virginia Plain for them, which is really a very strange
That's when
moment.
Roxy Music played the Civic
But
that night.
Yeah.
prior, or not prior, at any rate, because of our relationship with Ed, we had suggested to Warner's that if they actually used a little bit of their muscle, perhaps we could do a tour opening for Roxy on a North American tour, which would have, there was no real audience for Tin Huey, but if there was one that might kind of be tangential to it, a Roxy Music audience would probably be,
more open.
Exactly, more open to receiving what we were doing. And everybody, at Warner Brothers and Sonnenberg and Karen, they were all like, no. No, what you need to do is you need to go on a club tour. You need to go out there and tour and have people hear you, and then come. Then we'll see where it goes from there. And I'm thinking, well, what's better than touring where every gig that we play has a built-in audience of 2,000 people or more?
500 of them might like you.
And if 300 might like us, that's better than we did. So, they didn't push for us, and we accepted what they had to say, which is why Butler and I always believed that, which is a terrible way to go through life, was that we were always right and they were always wrong.
Right. Well, so this brings up a sad subject, which is really what ultimately happened then with Tin Huey. Why was there not a second album on Warner Brothers, and where did you guys go from there? And we can kind of just talk about that particular aspect of things, and then with part 2, we can get to the post Tin Huey years.
Fine.
Okay.
We didn't sell a lot of records. We just didn't.
You need to mention too that you left Akron and you went to, Woodstock, right?
Well, yeah, but that was after.
That would be after.
That was
Really?
after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
But yes, we did. Some of us did. We didn't sell a lot of records, and what had happened was Warner's had been a label that was historically an amazing label. They supported artists who didn't sell a lot of records.
Yep.
I was told by a person in the know when we were in California that no matter what had ever been done, the most Captain Beefheart albums that were ever sold were 17,000. And it didn't matter. He just would usually level off. There were 17,000 geeks out there. That's basically it. And Warner's also had Van Dyke Parks, who didn't sell records. Warner's had Little Feat, which at the time, their first couple albums did nothing.
Well, this was kind of like the Lenny Waronker years,
yes,
right?
And they basically had huge artists that
Randy
supported,
Newman, people like that.
Yeah,
Rose
supported
Before Swine, I think.
the lesser ones.
Yes.
And so, But what ended up happening, and I ended up having a long conversation, oddly later, with Robert Fripp about it. In 1979, there was a big crash in the economy. And historically, the record industry, the music industry, the entertainment industry in general had never really been affected by it. Because, the Depression happened, but people would still pay a nickel to go to a movie. Well, this was the time where the combination of, and this is the conversation with Fripp, the excesses of the record labels and the crash in terms of the dollar was the first time that it really sent them reeling. And we had a really well-endowed record deal. So to go to a second record, especially one that didn't sell a lot, and Karen had felt that all we needed to do was stay on the label and tour and tour and tour because she thought we were a great live out band, that would build us. A model for that would have been a band like Foghat.
Right. Okay.
It was touring that built them.
Right.
Just like us. Foghat, But
Often compared.
Often. Yes. So what ended up happening was they called and said, we're going to drop you. And we said, and I remember having this conversation, which was, well, you're obligated to give us another album. It's not an option. It was options after that. And he said, well, if you want to make an album, you can make an album and we'll bury it. And I said, well, if that's what we're going to do, we're going to spend every single penny that is in the contract, and we're going to give you an album of crap. And I don't care what you do with it. And then there were other conversations had by other people, but it led them to basically paying us a certain amount to get lost.
Right.
Now, then we continued on doing some demos, and you can understand this, Nick. It's like we would send a 3-song demo or 4-song demo to Harvey Leeds at MCA, and he'd be like, well, I really like that song. I'd like to hear more. And then something went to Virgin, and they liked a different song, but they'd like to hear more. Right. And then Chrysalis liked another song, but they want to hear more. And everybody in the band just sort of got really exhausted by this. And that's when the exodus out of Akron started.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember when the Bizarros were at that same point in their career where we got paid not to do the second album.
I know, isn't it great?
Yeah,
I bought a car.
But when we were sending out demos,
I mean, it was a Corolla.
Mine was a Valiant. That Russ.
Yeah, there we go, Nick. We're big rock stars.
But anyway,
I'm sorry.
Oh, well, we were sending out demos to the record labels. We got all these rejection letters, and one of them came back from a major label, and they sent us our tape back, but it was Elliot Murphy's.
Oh, it was the wrong tape?
Yeah.
They were rejecting Elliot?
Yeah.
That's funny. That's a great
I still have that letter.
So the Warner Brothers album by Tin Huey was called
Contents Dislodged During Shipment.
Right.
Which was a title that came from the side, word for word, the side of, close to word for word, of the Stouffer's frozen pizza box. Contents may become dislodged during shipment.
And then there is a second Tin Huey album, which was Disinformation.
Yes,
and just quickly, what is the story of that?
Disinformation was a bunch of stuff that we had. We had some very early stuff that we had recorded at our studio. We went to a studio there's a little bit of, let me condense it. After we did all that demo business, Butler moved to Manhattan. Ralph was moving to the Woodstock area because of the creative music studio that was run by Carl Berger and Anthony Braxton, Don Cherry. And I was going to move to Manhattan when I got it. Chris and I were in the studio recording our last clone single, which was English Kids and Sister Ray. And we were not recording it, we were mastering it, I think.
Sister Rose.
So thank you. My apologies. I'm taking way too much credit. at any rate, we got a call from Michael and Stuart while we were in Jersey at House of Music, where I got to meet Frankie Valli, saying that we were crazy to move to Manhattan. Kay, my wife, was getting ready to put the deposit on an apartment in Washington Heights, and that we'd be way happier in Woodstock, where we could rent houses and practice in basements and have a good school for my daughter and not have to worry about renting rehearsal space. Mm-hmm. And we were only like a little over an hour from Manhattan. Mm-hmm. So we moved to Woodstock at that point with everybody. So everybody was living in the New York area except Mark. Mm-hmm. Mark Price stayed back in Akron to run Bushflow Studios. Mm-hmm. And we just sort of were retooling, and ultimately it ended up with me waking up and realizing that I would never be a 6'10" power forward, so maybe it would be really fun to be in the rhythm section. And you can interpret that as you wish. But I ended up becoming the bass player live, even though I played keyboards on records.
So a lot of disinformation is from that period then?
What ended up happening was Michael Stu and I, with our friend Frank Campbell, who we called Blank Frank, playing bass on some of the stuff, recorded a number of tunes at Eddie Offord's studio. He was the engineer for Yes, who had his studio at the time located in Lee Von Helm's house.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So. Yeah, it was great that session when Lee Von came home from the road. Oh, you guys go on and play. What are you doing? And then we also recorded. We brought in Ralph Legnini on guitar, who became. We knew him as Ralphie Boy.
Right.
And that was the band that, so Ralph Carney, the two Ralphs, Michael Stewart and I went down to the Bronx, and we recorded at a friend's place, a friend of Ralph's place. And we had a couple of different producers help us with it. Butler, we brought Chris in to help us produce some tracks. And we brought in Rob Sabino, who was the keyboard player for Chic.
Okay.
And was the keyboard player on a lot of stuff on Bowie's Let's Dance album.
Okay.
He produced a couple things. And so there's a few of those tracks, a few of the tracks from Eddie's still yet to come out. And I'd have to look at the list of tunes to see what else came out of there. There was... well,
you do the Robert Wyatt cover. It's on there.
That was something that we did... I'm not sure if we recorded that at Mark's.
But anyway,
at any rate, so that was sort of like a hodgepodge second album,
right?
And that came out 20 years later. That came out in 1999,
right?
And Chris was really good friends and associates with these people in Hoboken called POS Records, which had put out a band. I don't know, Brad, whether you have the Sinatras. Have you ever heard of them?
I don't.
We got to get you some of them.
Yeah, I don't know them.
Yeah, the Sinatras. It was a ska take on all these Sinatra American songbook tunes. Yeah. Paul Michella, the drummer that replaced you at the Gold Hawk that night that got you mad, was in that band.
That's a long story.
Yeah, it's a different story. We'll do that in the parking lot.
Do that later.
But at any rate... so it came out on a label, which was Future Fossil, which was Chris's thing,
right,
and POS Records. Yeah. And that was disinformation.
Okay. So on that note, we have a lot more to talk with Harvey Gold about, but we're going to save that for our next episode of From Akron and Beyond. So this has been Bob Ethington with Nick Nicholas and our guest Harvey Gold, and we will see you next time.